that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I want to hope gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Energy Week with George Harvey and Tom Fennell, except that Tom Fennell isn't here. So we wish him well. He's recuperating from surgery for I think he's pretty clear that it was a life-threatening situation. He was given the choice of staying with us and celebrating Halloween or joining the zombie jamboree, and he decided, much to our delight, that he would stick around. This show is a summation of the previous week's news in relation to energy. I get on the internet every morning at some early hour and spend a couple of hours looking through the news, find what I can, put it up at my blog, geoharvey.wordpress.com, and I take the 20 best items that I come up with. I post about 10 to 15 a day, but I take the ones that I like the best or think are the most interesting and put them together for this news review. So we'll start into it. We're starting on Tuesday, I'm sorry, what am I doing? I'm way off base. I should be starting on Thursday, but Tuesday was just so exciting. Friday, October 17th, the Italian utility Enel is considering phasing out 23 obsolete thermal power plants in Italy in the near future, accounting for 11 gigawatts or 43% of the company's total capacity. The decommissioning procedure for 9 plants has already started, and those plants that are being decommissioned have a combined capacity of 2.2 gigawatts. And that is from ICIS. Now, the next item that we have, I'm being a little bit backward today. I should show you my face. Here I am. The next item that we have is about the Hinkley nuclear power plant in the UK. And I'm trying to be my own engineer, so of course nothing works properly. Tom usually does this. This is an artist's impression of Hinkley Point C. And the thing that gets this into the news is the UK's National Audit Office has begun an investigation into the controversial subsidy regime for the planned new Hinkley Point C nuclear plant. The financial watchdog will be checking whether the guaranteed price of £92 a megawatt hour, double the current cost, it represents value for the money. And this is the plant. That nuclear power plant is going to cost the taxpayers of the UK, or the ratepayers of the UK, or whoever is paying the money, $24.5 billion. And if you want to see it again, here is $24.5 billion. It's going to cost $1.5 billion plus just to hook it up to the grid, I have read. And what's happened here is that the government of the UK is really interested in having this thing. They are so interested that they really went out of their way, bent over backwards, to make sure that whoever invested in it was going to be happy. So they couldn't get investors very easily, and what they did was to court investors by guaranteeing that the plant would sell electricity at double the normal rate. And when they did that, they found that they didn't have the investors that they had hoped for coming forth anyway, at least not from Europe, so they had to take money from China to get the plant going. Meanwhile, the solar industry in the UK is objecting, and I'm sorry I'm looking all over the place here because what I'm doing is getting on to the next item. And the next item is this from Defense Systems. And by the way, that previous item was from The Guardian, I believe. Yes, I'm right. From Defense Systems, the Army, that is the U.S. Army, is gaining ground on its goal of going fossil-free at many of its installations, according to recently released program summary for its net zero initiative. The report, which covers fiscal 2013, breaks down efforts into 9 pilot installations in the program. Net zero, very interesting idea. You're going to have a building and it doesn't require any input of energy. That's net zero. So how do you do that? There are a number of ways of doing it. First of all, you have a very efficient building. The second thing is that you have a building that has, for example, solar PVs on its roof or on its face. It will collect sunshine and convert it into electricity. And typically a building of this type is so efficient that it requires almost no heat. I wrote an article for Green Energy Times a couple of months back about a net zero building in Brooklyn. And it was an apartment building. I talked to the architect about it, a man named Robert Scarano, and he told me that we have come to a point where it is possible to build a building, a house, for example. We can build a house, and if we put money, extra money, into sealing it, insulating it, making sure the ventilation is good, and so forth, we can build that building at the same price as a conventional building and yet have the energy inputs required to heat the building cut by 90%. So you've got a choice on the one hand of a building that costs $200,000 and on the other hand of a building that costs $200,000. And this building costs, just for the sake of argument, $1,500 a year to heat, and this building costs $150 a year to heat. And the big difference is that you have to do this in advance, and you don't pay for the furnace, and you don't pay for the chimney, which is why it's the same price. Anyway, the Army is doing that. The Army is very big on defense related issues pertaining to energy and global warming, and we will see more on that. Saturday, October 18th, we have a note from Clean Technica. Queensland network operator Ergon Energy wants to take some remote customers off-grid because the cost of maintaining the sprawling grid network, the new technology, such as solar and battery storage, costs so little, it makes sense that some customers have standalone energy systems. And we have a picture of a battery. There you go. That little teeny box, let's see, I have a cursor here. Oh, there it is. That little teeny box, if you can see the cursor kind of roaming around on the right side of this thing, that I believe is an outlet. I might be mistaken, but this battery system is about the size of a small refrigerator, I'm told. And they're actually installing them in people's homes and businesses in the outback. And because the cost of getting the transmission lines to buildings is higher than the cost of putting in solar and battery. Now the next item. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission issued a much-delayed report on Thursday on Yucca Mountain's suitability for vast shipments of spent nuclear fuel, saying it would be safe for storing nuclear waste. The 780-page staff report concluded the site with reasonable expectation could satisfy federal licensing requirements. This from Fiscal Times. And I have a little exhibit. This is Exhibit A. Let's see, let's put it there. That's a coin. That particular coin was minted by the Roman Caesar Galerius. He was the Caesar, which meant that he was second after the emperor in this system that was put together by Diocletian. This coin was minted roughly 1,700 years ago. And it's made of copper. It's a very nice coin. It's in almost perfect condition. I don't know if I can get it to shine at you. There you go. That particular coin is made of copper. It's about 5 times the size of a penny. If that coin could have been put into a an account, bank account, just by itself 1,700 years ago and accrued 1% interest ever since, it'd be worth enough money to buy a nice house. If it had earned 3% interest ever since, it would have been able to buy out all the currency in the world many times over. A huge multiple. I did the math before the show. And the point of this is the Roman Empire was probably, arguably, the longest living empire in the history of humanity. It lasted from 27 BC until, in the eastern part, 1453 AD, when it was destroyed by the Ottoman Empire, or the Ottoman Turks. They weren't an empire yet. And that's a long time. But the nuclear waste has to hang around longer than that. So I think we have to do better than a hole in the desert and say to everybody else, you're going to be responsible for this for the next however long it is, because whatever bank account we put together to maintain that, do we have a guarantee that it's going to be there in 100 years? If you had asked the people in Germany if their Deutschmark would have been good 50 years hence in 1870, let's say 40 years hence in 1880, because 1870 was before the Franco-Prussian War. If you had asked if it was going to be good 40 years hence, I think they would have said yes. But in 1920, they were manufacturing 100 billion mark postage stamps. So, as far as I'm concerned, we have to deal with it in the present. Otherwise, we have to acknowledge that we're putting it into the future and leaving it for people who have had nothing whatever to do with it. Oh well. Next item. And this goes to the same issue. Officials with the soon-to-close Vermont Yankee nuclear power plant said on Friday it would cost up to $1.24 billion to decommission the reactor, and that they currently have about half of that much in their fund dedicated to paying for the work. The figure was contained in a site assessment study. That issue is in the Washington Times. And here, of course, we have a photograph of the Vermont Yankee nuclear power plant, which was with the article. And so where are we going to get the $600 million from? Well, I mean, theoretically, Entergy can say, we're going to put it into a bank account, and we're going to let it sit in the bank account for 60 years and double its value, and that will decommission the plant. And okay, that's longer than the 40 years I just cited for the Deutschmark. We don't know what's going to happen in 60 years, except for one thing. We know the waste is going to be there unless we find some way of turning it into non-waste. And we've talked about that on the show, but we go on. More on nuclear power. A prominent volcanologist disputed the regulators' conclusion, this Japanese regulators, that 2 nuclear reactors are safe from a volcanic eruption in the next few decades, saying that such a prediction is impossible. The Japanese nuclear agency had said that these reactors were safe. And these are, I believe, the Sendai. Yes, it's the Sendai reactors. He said a cauldron eruption at one of several volcanoes, any one of several volcanoes surrounding the Sendai reactors, could cause a nationwide disaster. This is in the Japan Times. And I have a picture, actually, of a mountain. This is Mount Ontake, which is in Japan. That mountain it is a volcano, and very recently, in the last couple of weeks, it blew its top. Not badly, but enough to kill about 50 people. And that was, it's kind of frightening to think about this in terms of what will it do to a nuclear reactor. So there is Mount Ontake, a photo by Kamui, and this was found at Wikimedia Commons, which, by the way, is commons.wikimedia.org. .org, as I recall, but they have, if you're doing a term paper or something and you need to photograph, you get a lot of stuff there. Now, going on, Sunday, October 19th, we have this from the Energy Collective. The International Energy Agency has released its second annual energy efficiency market report for 2014, confirming energy efficiency's place as the world's, quote, first fuel, end quote, and estimating the value of the energy efficiency market at between $310 and $360 billion and growing. So this is energy efficiency, and of course, Vermont is pretty good in energy efficiency. The figures for the states came out, I think yesterday, and Vermont is number 3. Massachusetts is number 1, and I forget who's number 2. But Vermont tied with Oregon and Rhode Island to be in the number 3 position, which I think is fairly impressive, all things considered. Clean Technica, on the same day, this is Sunday, October 19th, came up with this report. India's Ministry of New and Renewable Energy has released revised guidelines for for auction of solar photovoltaic power projects with a significant hike in overall capacity. The government plans to add 15 gigawatts of solar power capacity by Q1 2019. The first auctions will involve 1,000 megawatts, which 1,000 megawatts is a gigawatt capacity, that from Clean Technica. And here again, I have a photograph, and this isn't a photograph. This is very likely to be an artist's rendering. It's possible that it's a photograph. I really don't know. But this is a rendering or photograph, hard to tell, of a big solar photovoltaic farm in India in the desert. And they have a lot of desert, they can have a lot of farms. So the next item on Monday, you can see it there on the screen, now you can see me on the screen, is France's love affair with nuclear over? This is a big question. During the next 11 years, France will reduce the percentage of electricity from nuclear from 75% to 50%. In order to do that, estimates are as many as 20 of France's 58 reactors will have to be closed and replaced with efficiency and renewable sources of power. Now, this is an interesting thing because the French, many years ago, decided that they would go to nuclear power to provide almost all the power they've got. And they got very smart about this. Nuclear power, like in most baseload type power plants, a nuclear plant has to run all night when nobody wants power in order to provide power for the daytime peak demand. So the French decided that they were going to heat their homes with electricity. So the nighttime demand would be the nighttime supply would be taken up. And what they found, this is an interesting thing, just at the time that Germany decided it was going to close all its nuclear power plants, Europe got hit by one of the coldest winters that it's had in recent times. The French discovered that they did not have enough electricity from their nuclear power plants to heat their houses. So where did they get power? They imported it from Germany, which had just closed down almost half its nuclear reactors because the Germans had other ways of producing power, and of course part of that meant lighting coal plants. But the Germans have also replaced an enormous amount of their capacity with solar and wind in the last 3 years. And the French are looking at this and saying they want to reduce the amount of load that they have from nuclear. During that cold snap, if they had had wind power, they would have been able to take that slack up without having to buy it from the Germans, possibly. And this is something that they were aware of. That item came from oilprice.com, along with a bunch of commentary by me. Okay, the next item that we have on BBC News, still Monday, October 20th, is this thing. Investors are seeking funding from the UK government for an ambitious plan to import solar energy from generated in North Africa. The Tunur project aims to bring 2 gigawatts of solar power, enough for 2.5 million UK homes from to the UK from Tunisia, if the company wins a contract for difference. Now, what's going to have to happen here is that they're going to have to build transmission lines from Tunisia under the Mediterranean Sea to Italy. I believe that's the plan. And then from Italy north, probably through Switzerland and Germany, to, who knows, Belgium, Netherlands, possibly France, and then across to the UK. The picture that we have here is concentrating solar, and those individual items that you see there, these, if you can see that where the cursor is, the little kind of whitish things in the middle of each of these bluish squares is a tower, quite a few stories tall, that is getting hot in the sun. And typically what they do with a thing like this is they have salt, and the salt is a particular salt that melts at a reasonably low temperature, and they can pump it into a reservoir. And they've got really, really, really hot salt, which they can use for powering steam turbines or whatever it is that they want to use that heat for to make electricity. And the result of this is that they spend the day making some big reservoirs of a hot product, very hot, so they can get the heat out at night. So the concentrating solar, in theory, you could have this going 24/7. And when that happens, that means that you've got a fairly stable source of electricity. It's going to be getting hot during the daytime. If it's in the Tunisian desert, it's going to be doing it most days during the year by far. And it will start producing power sometime in the morning, just as everybody is really kind of gearing up for work. And it will continue to produce power all during the day while the traditional peak demand is going. And then when night comes, as the traditional peak demand continues, this thing will continue producing power after the sun has gone down for a number of hours. As I said, theoretically, it could go 24/7 as you, if the engineering is done for that purpose. This is an artist's rendering of what this thing will look like in the Tunisian desert. This, by the way, is the kind of plant that has been blamed for numbers of birds being killed in California, ranging from a few birds a month to thousands of birds every day, depending upon what source you're dealing with. And it's very unclear what the actual number is. So we will go on. Also on the same day, and I should look and make sure that I know what day it is, Monday, October 20th, we find this. A recent Union of Concerned Scientists study found that America can nearly quadruple its renewable electricity in the next 15 years, reaching 23% by 2030. This comes in response to the Environmental Protection Agency proposal that America set a modest goal of 12% renewable energy by 2030. And this comes with a graph, and the graph is really kind of interesting. Let me get that graph up for you. Here is the graph. Now, what's happening here is, as you can see, we have sets of bars. Here is 2020, and over here on the right is 2030. The red bars are the EIA business as usual amount. The EIA is the Energy Information Administration, and that is part of the U.S. Department of Energy. And the EIA, and by the way, I should mention about this, what we're talking about when we're talking about renewable here is not solar, wind, biomass, and new hydro and geothermal. It is those plus the big hydro dams and things that we have in place, which are producing something on the order of 6% of our power already. This is just the new ones coming online. And there are many, many, many technologies here. There are 5 types of hydropower that I can think of offhand that don't require dams. There are several kinds of solar. We've seen concentrating solar just now heating up typically salt. There's also solar PVs, and there's different flavors of those. And there's other kinds of solar thermal. There are different kinds of wind power. There are different kinds of geothermal power. And there are many different kinds of biomass. You don't have to be burning wood to be burning biomass. You can be, biomass includes biodigesters. It includes ethanol that's mixed in with gasoline and things of that nature. Now what happens here is that the red is what the EIA says. The blue is the EPA proposal. The EIA is making a projection of what they expect. The EPA is making a proposal for what they will require. And the UCS demonstrated growth approach is what the Union of Concerned Scientists believe is a reasonable thing to use as a goal. Clearly, their reasonable goal, they believe, is about double what the EPA has said. Now, the reason I'm going through this is because I want to be very clear on projections. The Energy Information Administration's projections are used by various people, and they're cited by various people as what we can expect for renewable power in the future. Anybody who's going to use their projections, their forward-looking projections of what they expect to happen in the future, should probably, before they do that, look at the history of those projections, look at what they projected last year, the year before that, and so forth, and what the history of the outcome of those projections has been on the short term. Because in the last 5 years, I believe, 4 out of the last 5 years, they made projections for 25 years away that were achieved the following year. In other words, they were uniformly not just wrong, but amazingly wrong. The one that they didn't do that, they actually made a projection for what they expected by 2040, which was already achieved before their projection. And that based on data that came from a different department in the Department of Energy. The EIA is constrained to perform their projections using specific models that do not allow any change based on any action by Congress, which means that if the solar power has got an incentive associated with it, and the incentive will last until the end of next year, then they have to assume that the incentive will disappear at the end of next year, and may not assume any action on the part of Congress to extend that or to renew it or anything of that nature. On the other hand, the fossil fuels industry is getting about 5 times as much government support as the renewable industry, and because that government support has no termination date, they have to assume that the fossil fuel industry will continue to get support forever, and that the renewable industries, solar and wind and so forth, will not get any support. And so these figures that they've got of 9% here and 10% here for 2020 and 2030 assume that renewable power will get no support after next year. And so their graphs that they have for growth in renewables after next year are basically flat. They expect basically almost no growth at all. By contrast, the EPA is saying, well, we're really not all that interested in what happens by 2020. What we're interested in is what happens in the medium term, and we want the states to do things. So they have outlined what to do, and given each state a goal, with the single exception of the state of Vermont, which is not burning any fossil fuels for electrical power, contrary to what you may have read in the not very distant past in various publications in Vermont. We do not burn natural gas for power in Vermont to a degree that is really has much effect on our economics. We base most of our electric demand is from hydro. Some of it is actually still from nuclear, even though we're not buying any power from Vermont Yankee. Some of it is coming from other sources, and the sources that we have that include wind and solar and biomass are all growing. Biomass is a surprisingly important part of the power portfolio from Vermont, because we have, I think it's 16 biodigesters in the state, and basically what happens is that agricultural waste, a lot of manure, but a lot of agricultural waste goes into the biodigesters, which go through an anaerobic fermentation process that produces methane, and the methane can be used to run a generator. It's a system that's been around for a long time, but it's been around in Vermont for a long time. We have about 15 or 16 of these. I think it's 16. California got its first one just a couple of weeks ago. So we're ahead of California in that respect. But we don't have to do that with just farm waste. We can do it with waste from restaurants. We can do it with waste from hotels. And if people are willing to be clean enough about what they put into their compost bins for putting out, like we have in Brattleboro, street-side compost pickup, if the compost is sufficiently clean, you could use it for that as well. And the result of that is that we can get a fair amount of our power from, and by fair amount, I'm not talking about half or a third, I'm talking about maybe 6 or 8%, which is an appreciable amount. I don't know the actual amount, but these biodigesters are actually putting a lot of power on the grid. It's an appreciable amount of power. We have got, I believe it's 10 solar arrays of 2.2 megawatts, and those are putting a lot of power on the grid. We've got a number of wind facilities in Vermont also, but getting back to this news item, the amount of power that's put on the grid by renewables, in my opinion, I think I could say that I'm speaking for Tom, but also I'm speaking for a lot of other people who have agreed with this in the past. The thing that's really going to bring renewable power to the grid is going to be when renewable power is at grid parity. Grid parity means that the renewable power, the cost of renewable power, is low enough that it can compete successfully with conventional power systems. And we will see some of that coming up very quickly. Our next item, this is an interesting one. The hot summer, this hot summer was the third in which Southern California went without 2.2 gigawatts from the San Onofre nuclear power plant. Drought reduced the state's hydroelectric output by another 1,628 megawatts, 1.628 gigawatts. Despite these events, California did not have any major outages. Now, this is really interesting. When you have a hot summer, that's when the grid demand goes through the roof because people want to have their air conditioners going. So you get a peak load in the afternoon when it's hot out, when the air conditioners are going, and yet there were no power outages. And the reason for this is because California is approaching its goals. It's actually achieving its goals for renewable energy. They are getting power from sunlight. They are getting power from wind. They are getting power, major amounts of power, because they're in the Southwest where there's a lot of this available. There are major amounts of power from geothermal, and that power is all going onto the grid. They have very little in the way of biomass. Vermont has more biomass available, at least more biodigesters, as I just said, than California. California has only one biodigester, but they have got a number of different sources of renewable power, and even though the drought has basically cut their hydropower to, in some places, half or less what it had been, and even though they lost 2 nuclear reactors at San Onofre, that's, by the way, an interesting story. The San Onofre reactors needed new steam generators. And the steam generators had to be swapped out. They're very, very expensive pieces of equipment. They cost about, I think it was over $1 billion. And I think that's the 2 of them. But they went to Mitsubishi and they said, we need new steam generators. And Mitsubishi said, okay. And by the way, if you allow us to do a very slight modification in the design, we can give you more power out of the steam generators. So the folks at San Onofre said, okay, and they put them in, and they told the Nuclear Regulatory Commission they were a drop-in replacement for what was already there, but the Nuclear Regulatory Commission didn't look into it and say, well, this is not exactly a drop-in replacement, and they just let them go ahead. They put in the steam generators, and about a year later, a year and a half later, they discovered that the steam generators were leaking nuclear radioactive steam out into the environment, and that's not a good thing to have happen with a steam generator. And that was after only about a year and a half of service. Now, the pipes that they have in there do crack from time to time, and so they're prepared for that. When that happens, you plug them up. There's thousands of them, so plugging up 1 or 2 is not a big deal, but they had to plug up lots and lots and lots of them. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission or not, they knew they couldn't use those steam generators any longer because they were losing their pipes too fast. And so they had to get new steam generators or close down. And what happened in the end was it was closed down because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission would not give them the ability just to plug them up and keep going, which I don't think they were really planning on doing anyway. Nevertheless, the equivalent of what is this? This is This is the equivalent of more than 5 Vermont Yankee reactors that it was offline, taken offline, that had been online in California between those 2 reactors, and another loss from hydro, and they were able nonetheless, because they started getting a lot of power from wind and solar, to go to keep going and not have major power outages. Now, the next thing that we've got here is an interesting piece, and I've got it on the screen already. I'm going to read this for anybody who isn't reading it himself. Maybe I'll switch back to myself. That way I can, oh no, I was on myself. How do you like that? A report from the European Union on power prices is only the latest of a number coming to the same conclusion. Along with 3 earlier reports, it shows that, quote, wind energy is one of the lowest cost options for reducing carbon emissions, end quote, with each focusing on a different attribute of wind energy's performance. As I said, that came from Clean Technica. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the report, to the graph, and actually I've got this clearer. I had it clearer. I don't have it clear. Yes, I do. All I've got to do is fumble for a little bit, and you people will see. Here it is. This is a graph that came from Lazard. Now, this is Lazard's analysis. And Lazard is not an energy company. It doesn't have an axe to grind in terms of energy. They're not selling wind turbines. They're not selling nuclear power plants. They're not selling coal with carbon capture. What they're doing is they're doing analysis. They are a financial company which is advising customers on how to invest their money. And their most important product here is accuracy. They want to be as accurate as they possibly can. And what we have here is the unsubsidized levelized cost of energy comparison. The levelized cost of energy, which is referred to as the LCOE, is a system which is used in order to be able to compare apples with apples Because when you're comparing different kinds of energy, for example, if you're comparing solar with nuclear, the nuclear has to run all night whether you want it to or not. The solar can't run at night whether you want it to or not. They're very different. A gigawatt of nuclear power is not equal to a gigawatt of solar. For one thing, the nuclear power has a capacity factor of 0.9 typically, which means that 90% of the time it's producing 100% of the power that it produces. But solar power typically has in Vermont, typically has a capacity factor of about 0.2. So if you want to replace a gigawatt of nuclear with solar, you're going to have about 4.5 or 5 gigawatts of solar, and that extra is going to, the solar is going to be producing extra during the daytime when the sun is going. It's going to produce far more than the nuclear plant is on a sunny day, but it will produce nothing at night. So if you really want to do it, you have to have solar and batteries. So that starts to get expensive. It's more expensive than nuclear. However, when we start looking at the LCOE, we're talking about an attempt to compare apples with apples. And here you can see, I think perhaps, if you can see the cursor, the top two items here are solar PVs, rooftop residential, and rooftop C&I, which is commercial and industrial. These are pretty expensive. However, there is a point, this is a point at which the LCOE is not comparing apples with apples, because here we're comparing cost to the consumer with costs that are costs at the wholesale market. So these two are consumer, and the consumer might be an industry or commercial operation, but these two are basically, you can think of them as retail power, where the rest of these are basically, you can think of them as wholesale power. But this is an interesting graph. If you look at the bottom half, this is conventional down here. This area down at the bottom of this graph has diesel generators, which, as you can see, are unholy expensive, but of course people don't use them unless they're left with no other choice. And it's one of the reasons why island nations, Tokelau, for example, in the South Pacific, they had diesel generators. They were desperate to get rid of those diesel generators. They replaced them with solar and batteries. It meant that they could keep their money in their local economy, and they didn't have to be shipping out costs of electricity constantly. And of course, with a diesel generator, it goes down, and there typically isn't a backup system on the island. It means the island's electric system is off until the diesel generator is back on. Below that, you'll see gas peaking, and gas peaking plants are plants that can come online really, really fast compared to a gas plant which has a big boiler. The reason, because a big boiler takes hours and hours and hours to heat up. Some of them take well over a day, and these peaking plants can come online in minutes. So if a nuclear plant or a coal plant or a standard gas plant goes offline, one of these peaking plants comes online, and it produces power at a very much higher cost, wholesale cost, which is not typically passed on to the retail customer, at least not in much of the United States, because the retail customers pay fixed rates. But the wholesale price is going to be reflected in a higher fixed rate at some point in the future if it comes on too often, and the profitability of a utility can depend to some extent on making sure that the power plants that it's using or are kept at peak capacity. However, going below this, you see IGCC, which is gas with carbon capture, and then nuclear. Now, interesting news came out. We talked about it already. The cost of nuclear, the Vermont Yankee decommissioning is going to be $1.24 billion. And in terms of the power that plant has produced, that is about $7.50 per megawatt hour that it has ever produced. So if you can add this to the cost of nuclear, bringing the $92 minimum that you can see, and the $132 maximum up to roughly $100 and $140. However, those prices do not include the cost of getting rid of the waste, which we don't have any kind of clue what that's going to cost, and they do not include the amount of money that the federal government would have to spend that would be taken from the taxpayer in the event of a disaster, and they do not include the other contingencies that might come up involving nuclear power. So this is nuclear power. When you include those things, the $100 to $140 that I mentioned earlier becomes higher, and if the cost of getting rid of the waste is the same as the cost of decommissioning, and we have no reason to believe that it will be, but it could be a multiple of that, it could be less, I don't know. But if it does, that'll bring it up to about $108 to $148, and that does not include the other contingency costs in the event of some kind of catastrophic failure. So nuclear winds up being very expensive. Remember, this is not me producing these figures. This is Lazard producing these figures, and the purpose of this is to be as accurate as possible. Coal, $66 to $151. Combined cycle, that's natural gas, $61 to $87. Now, when you compare these with solar PV, 72 to 86, you can see that solar PV, if you don't mind what, buying the power, and you don't mind what time that power is bought, solar is pretty competitive. Now you can go down to the battery storage, which is the bottom one in the alternative energy group, and say, okay, we can store that power, but it's going to be expensive. On the other hand, the solar thermal that they have out in the desert that people are complaining about killing birds, you can see that solar thermal is pretty comparable to the price of nuclear power, probably less than comparable to the price of nuclear power, and it is it's a technology that is well, let's just say it's an interesting technology to watch. Geothermal, okay, let's look at this. Wind, $37 to $81. At $37 to $81, comparing it with natural gas, which we've been hearing is so cheap, wind is cheaper, much, much cheaper. And here's the deal with wind. The wind doesn't always blow, but we know what the capacity factor of the wind is. And when we put in wind farms, we distribute them. It's distributed power. With a capacity factor that is sufficiently, well, if the capacity factor is 0.3, and we want it to be the same in terms of its output as nuclear, nuclear has a capacity factor of about 0.9, we'd need 3 times as much wind. But if we've got that wind distributed, say in Maine, in Vermont, in Kansas, in North Dakota, we could say, okay, wherever the wind is blowing, that's where we get our power from, because it's not going to stop everywhere at once. And that makes it all of a sudden very reliable because it is distributed across a geographic area. And that is one of the things that we should bear in mind when we're talking about distributed power. Now, one other thing here, you'll notice that there's one power source that is listed as costing $0 to $50 per megawatt hour, and that is energy efficiency. It is the cheapest source. But we're not going to get there on energy efficiency alone, because people are going to want to be able to drive their cars, people are going to want to be able to be warm, people are going to want to be able to do the things that they do, and that's just the way people are. So we've got to go to other things, other models. I'm getting off of this, going to the next item on the list. And let's see my face again on the screen. I don't want to spoil what I'm saying here. A new, somewhat clever means of managing and improving efficiency of the power grid was recently unveiled by a coalition of some of the largest automakers. It is, in fact, simply a technology that allows the direct communication of utility companies and plug-in electric vehicles via the cloud. As long as the internet's going, your car is going to know When is the cheapest time to charge? And if the grid needs the power, it can discharge, which means that those cars become grid backup for solar and wind. That came from Clean Technica, and that is something that was done by the auto industry. The next item from Financial Times. Renewable energy lies at the heart of a dispute between Spain and France. Spanish wind turbines easily produce more power than is needed in the domestic market, but that energy is wasted because there are few transmission lines to carry it across the border to France, but France wants to protect its nuclear reactors from competition. I wonder if we are at a point where the Spanish might be thinking of an underwater cable, a submarine cable that would carry that power to perhaps Italy. The Italians don't need it. The British do. Maybe Great Britain. Wednesday, October 22nd. The Department of Defense released its 2014 Climate Change Adaptation Roadmap. This is the Department of Defense outlining how the military plans to adapt to climate change. For the first time, the Pentagon discusses climate change as an immediate risk, a factor to be incorporated into how the military operates on a day-to-day basis today. This is the military. This is the military now. This is not Greenpeace. This is the U.S. military, the Department of Defense, which is going to be told what to do to some extent by whoever wins the election. And if people who are denying climate change win the election, then there's going to be a difference between them and the Department of Defense. Okay, that was from the Energy Collective. Energy Matters supplied us with this. A new report from the U.S. DOE's Lawrence Berkeley and National Renewable Energy Laboratories on the price impacts of the Sunshot Initiative has found the cost of solar energy in America fell 19% in 2013, with utility-scale PV systems falling below $2 a watt, 59% below what was modeled, probably by the Energy Information Administration, which I've already pointed out in this broadcast is pretty bad in projecting things, in 2010, just 3 years earlier. Oh well. Business Green gave us this on Wednesday. The U.S. wind industry saw installations surpass last year's total month. Last month, the U.S. wind industry saw installations surpass last year's total last month. According to new data published this week, the American Wind Industry Association announced that the total for the first 9 months of 2014 was 1,254 megawatts. The installations for 2014 have now exceeded the 1,088 megawatts installed in the whole of last year. And here I've got such a cute picture. Let's put it on. Here is a picture of the deer playing at the foot of the wind turbines. There they are. Don't seem to be bothered by them much. But then, you know, what do they know? Okay, Thursday, October 23rd. Trash to Fuel, the stuff of the 1980s sci-fi comedy movie trilogy Back to the Future, is now a reality. The 2015 biofuel Chevrolet Impala, not a tricked-out DeLorean, really can run on leftovers, table scraps, and oh yeah, grains from brewing beer, as Quasar Energy Group uses organic waste to produce biogas, which can fuel the car. Well, if you happen to get one of those cars and you happen to be chummy with one of those people in Vermont who owns a biodigester, maybe you could talk him into giving you some natural gas, because that's what they're producing. That from Florida Weekly. Now from Alt Energy Mag, the U.S. is reducing oil dependence, slowing the growth of electricity needs, and making energy services more affordable to all Americans. And our smarter use of energy is the single most important contributor to these positive trends, according to a report released today by the National Resources Defense Council. Interesting. And finally, Think Progress released this. We're ending on a sour note, I suppose. Satellite observations of huge oil and gas basins in East Texas and North Dakota confirm a staggering 9 to 10% leakage rate of the heat-trapping methane. Scientists evaluating this put the use of fracked gas in perspective. In short, fracking speeds up human-caused climate change thanks to the methane leaks alone. It ain't no replacement for coal. So thank you for joining me. I think I'm ending this show just a couple of minutes early, but if I am, I think Roland might forgive me. And I will be here, I hope, a week from now to bring you another Energy Week. And hopefully Tom Fennell will be back. So we wish him well, and I wish you well, and we all wish each other well, and ain't that grand. See ya. We spin and we toil, we work all day, sowing and reaping, we store goods away, so we can be dressed well on the day that we die. We dig and drill and waste what we find, break up the earth, leaving little behind, but we will grow lilies in the by and by. I want to point out that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow